Rena Merrick had grown used to the silence of high country mornings. At 8,000 feet, the air thinned out in a way that made every breath feel like it had traveled miles before reaching her lungs. The Wind River Range rose like a broken saw blade to the west, its peaks dusted with the last traces of spring snow. Down below, the prairie rolled out in waves of dry grass and sage. But up here, in her little world of timber and rock and wind, time moved slower, almost gently, as if it pitied her loneliness. She had been a widow for 2 years now. The grief no longer tore at her, but it lived inside her the way an old injury does. It was quiet, but never gone. Her days were simple enough. Gather mushrooms, collect herbs, chop wood, tend to her little goat, sell what she could in town, come home before the coyotes cried. This morning, she wandered deeper into the pines than usual, searching for a rare kind of morel that grew only in the shadowed folds of the ridge. The forest floor was cool, soft with pine needles. The air smelled of resin and damp earth. She carried a woven basket on her hip and hummed a tune she barely remembered learning. Then she heard it, a sound so faint she almost mistook it for a bird caught in a thorn bush. A small whimper, then another. Rena stilled. The forest held its breath. She stepped carefully toward the sound, pushing aside branches heavy with needles. When she rounded a fallen log, she froze. A man lay there beneath the slanting trunk of an old pine, half conscious, his back against the roots. His leg was twisted strangely, his pant leg torn and darkened with blood. Scratches lined his face, as if he had run through brambles without slowing down. In his arms held tightly, as if his very soul depended on it, were 2 little girls, no more than 5 years old, both clinging to him in fear and exhaustion. Rena felt her heartbeat kick hard. The man blinked slowly, struggling to lift his head. His voice came out broken, scraped raw from thirst. "Please, help me," he whispered. "Help me and my girls." Rena dropped to her knees beside him. "Good Lord, what happened to you?" He tried to speak, but the words tangled. She saw the strain in his face, the trembling in his hands. He wasn't just tired. He was close to collapsing for good. "We need to get you upright," she said softly. "Can you stand if I help you?" He shook his head weakly. "My leg. It gave out. I couldn't run any farther." "Run? From what?" His eyes, deep, dark, and full of shadows, met hers. "Bandits," he rasped. "They want me, and the girls." Rena felt a chill sweep her spine, but fear didn't freeze her. It sharpened her. Without wasting another heartbeat, she slid one of the children into her arms. The girl was light as a doe, her small fingers curling into Rena's collar. The man hesitated. You'd take us in?" "You're in no shape to argue, Rena said firmly. "Come on, lean on me." It took nearly all her strength to help him stand. He bit back a groan as his injured leg brushed the ground, but he clung to consciousness for the sake of the child still in his arms. Step by step, Rena guided them out of the trees, down the slope, and toward her little cabin, tucked at the edge of the clearing. The cabin was rough-built but well cared for. Chinked logs, a small porch, a single window polished clean. Inside, everything was tidy. The quilt folded just so. The tools hung in neat rows. The hearth swept. Rena guided the man to her bed. "Lie down carefully," she murmured. He did, lowering the girls beside him. Rena knelt and rolled up the torn pant leg. The wound was ugly, deep enough to slow him for weeks, if not tended. She looked up at him. "Why were those bandits after you? You're not carrying gold." His breath caught. He didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "I don't know how far they chased us. I didn't see them again after dawn." He swallowed. "But they wanted to take my daughters. And I couldn't let that happen. Rena's voice softened. You're safe here. You'll stay until that leg heals. He blinked, stunned by her certainty. You'd keep us, even when you know nothing about me? She shrugged faintly. You have 2 little girls depending on you. That's enough. He stared at her a long moment, something like gratitude flickering across his worn features. Then with quiet hope, will you look after them while I'm bedridden? Rena felt her cheeks warm, but she smiled. My dream was to be a schoolteacher once, she said lightly. Guess this is close enough. The corners of his mouth twitched, as if he wanted to smile, but no longer had the strength. Rena fetched warm water and herbs. As she cleaned the wound, he hissed through his teeth, yet never pulled away. The girls watched her with wide, trusting eyes. When she finished binding the leg, she asked gently, What's your name? The man's voice dropped low. Andrew Hale. The name meant nothing to her then. But soon enough, the whole Wind River country would speak it in whispers. And none of them would guess that the injured man lying in Rena's small, quiet cabin was not a wanderer, nor a lost traveler, but the young master of the Hale Rancho man, with a fortune behind him, enemies on his trail, and a heart on the edge of falling for the woman who had saved his life. Morning came early on the high plains. Light slid between the cracks of Rena's shutters, touching the wooden floor in pale gold stripes. She rose the way she always did quiet, steady, as if afraid any sudden movement might break the fragile peace inside her cabin. But today the peace was different. It breathed. It had weight. It had the soft shape of 2 sleeping little girls and the labored rhythm of a wounded man in her bed. Rena warmed a pot of goat's milk, stirring slowly so it wouldn't scald. The little girls, she had learned their names were Lily and Rose, shifted restlessly on the quilt laid out near the hearth. She touched each forehead gently. A mother would have done the same, she thought, though she had never been one. The thought settled into her chest like a warm stone. When the milk was ready, Lily opened her eyes first. She blinked at Rena, then sat up clutching her ragged little blanket. Morning, honey, Rena said softly. You hungry? The child nodded, her dark braids falling loose over her shoulders. Rose followed soon after. Within minutes, both girls were sipping warm milk from tin cups, legs tucked beneath them. Andrew stirred on the bed, trying to sit but wincing before he managed it. Rena crossed the room quickly. Easy now, you'll tear the stitches. Andrew breathed through the pain. His voice was still rough from exhaustion. I should be doing something. Helping, at least. You are helping, she said firmly. You're staying alive. He didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Rena eased him back against the pillows. His face was less pale than last night, though still drawn. In the daylight, she noticed details she hadn't before: the strength in his shoulders, the high cheekbones marking his Apache heritage, the deep gentleness in his eyes when he looked toward his daughters. Rose crawled up onto the bed and laid her head against his arm. Andrew kissed the top of her hair, then looked at Rena with something like apology. They're not used to strangers, he said quietly, but they trust you. They hardly ever trust anyone they don't know. Rena felt heat touch her cheeks. Children know who means them well, she answered, and they know you're safe here. He didn't reply. He just watched her for a long moment, long enough that she had to look away and busy her hands with straightening the quilt. Every morning, Rena coaxed the girls out of bed, brushed their tangled hair, and fed them oatmeal, sweetened with a pinch of dried berries. Andrew would sit propped against the wall, trying to hide how much his leg ached. She changed his bandages, applying herbs she'd gathered from the ridge comfrey for swelling, yarrow for blood. You know these plants well, he said one afternoon as she worked. Like someone taught you long ago. My husband, she said quietly. Before he passed, he taught me a little of everything. Andrew lowered his gaze. I'm sorry. Truly. She nodded without speaking. Some grief didn't need words. By the second week, Andrew could hobble around with the help of a wooden cane she carved for him. He followed her to the edge of the woods, carrying a small sack, while the girls ran ahead picking wildflowers. Rena showed him which mushrooms were safe, which ones would put a man in the ground by nightfall. You know, he said after a while, you move through these woods like you were born here. Rena smiled faintly. When you live alone, the land becomes your only neighbor worth talking to. Then I'm glad you took in 3 noisy ones, he said with a subtle grin. And to her surprise, she was glad too. The cabin felt fuller, warmer even when nothing changed in its shape. One calm evening, they sat on the porch steps watching the sun drop behind the Wind River peaks. Lily and Rose were asleep inside. The air smelled of sage and cooling earth. Coyotes called from far off, a sound that usually made Rena feel smaller than the night itself. But not tonight. Andrew shifted, careful of his leg. I owe you more than I can repay, he said. You didn't have to save us. Didn't have to care for strangers. You weren't strangers for long, Rena said quietly. Her voice surprised even her. Andrew looked at her, then really looked. Deep and searching, as though trying to read the truth inside her. Rena, he said softly, you've given my girls laughter again. They've called you Mama Rena more times than I can count. I hope that doesn't trouble you. It doesn't, she whispered. He reached out, hesitant, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. Her breath caught. She hadn't been touched gently in years, not like this, not with reverence. I don't know who you truly are, she murmured, or where you came from. And yet I care for you. I didn't expect that. I didn't want it to happen. But it did. Andrew's hand cupped her cheek, warm and steady. No matter who I am, he said, voice low and earnest, I swear I'll stand beside you. If you'll have me. It felt like the world paused around them, the wind settling, the birds falling still, the vast sweep of land leaning closer to hear her answer. Rena didn't speak. She simply leaned into his touch, and his forehead rested against hers, in a moment, soft enough to break and mend a heart all at once. She didn't know then that the peace surrounding them was only a borrowed thing, that trouble was already riding toward them from the valley below, that the man she had come to love was no simple wanderer at all, but the young master of the Heir ranch, whose past would soon come knocking on her humble wooden door. The morning began like any other, quiet, sun-warmed, carrying the clean scent of pine rising from the hills. Rena was kneeling by the fire pit, scrubbing out a pot with sand and warm water, when a faint rumble drifted across the clearing. Not thunder. Hoofbeats. She stood slowly, drying her hands on her apron. From the tree line beyond her garden patch, 5 riders emerged, moving in a tight formation, their silhouettes sharp against the shimmering light. Their horses climbed the slope with practiced ease, breaths steaming in the cool air. Rena's pulse kicked hard. Strangers seldom came this high, unless they were lost, or looking for something, or someone. Andrew was in the woods with Lily and Rose, gathering firewood. She felt the weight of the empty clearing behind her, the sudden stillness of the birds. The riders stopped a dozen yards from the cabin. The man at the front, thick mustache, weathered face, shoulders square as a fence post, tipped his hat politely. Ma'am, he said, voice deep and steady. Begging your pardon for coming unannounced. Rena swallowed. What brings you here? The man reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and held it up for her to see. On it was a charcoal sketch, strong jaw, severe brows, hair tied loosely back. It was Andrew. We've been searching for this man, the writer said. Our young master, Andrew Heir. We heard he might have come through these hills. Rena's breath caught. So this was who he truly was. A man with people loyal enough to scour mountains for him. She managed, "Why are you looking for him?" The man exchanged a glance with the others. "Ma'am, the Heir Ranch has been under threat. A bandit gang hit our outer lands. The family home was attacked. We lost 3 good men trying to get the master and his girls to safety." He cleared his throat. "We reckon he's been running, trying to keep ahead of trouble." Rena's heart squeezed painfully. I don't know." Before she could say more, the riders stiffened, hearing footsteps behind them. Andrew stepped out of the trees, a basket of mushrooms balanced on one hip. Lily and Rose trailed behind him, each carrying a fistful of wildflowers. He stopped cold at the sight of the horses, his jaw tightening. The mustached man swung down from his saddle. "Young master," he exhaled. Relief washed over him. "Thank God we found you alive." Andrew set the basket down slowly. The girls pressed to his legs, frightened. Rena stood rooted, watching. The man approached carefully. "Sir, we've been looking for weeks. The ranch is in bad shape. The bandits who attacked, they've been making trouble all across Wind River country." Andrew gave a long, weary breath. "I figured as much." Rena slipped inside the cabin, her hands trembling. She didn't want to intrude, but she needed to steady herself. She stopped halfway to the table when she heard voices outside, low, urgent, familiar. She moved quietly to the corner window, where the shutter had a small gap. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but she had to know. "Sir," the mustached man said, voice heavy, "you gotta come home. The ranch won't hold without you. And the bandits, God help us, they'll come again." Andrew's answer came tight. "Did they hurt anyone else?" "A few horses gone. Some buildings burned. Your father's been a wreck. Your mother, well, she's trying to hold the place upright. But the folks need their young master back." Rena felt the words slide like cold water down her spine. Young master. Of a wealthy ranch. Of a powerful family. Andrew Hale was not the man she thought she'd found bleeding under the pine. The man continued, "The gang is still hunting you. They know taking you or the children would cripple the Hale holdings. That's why you gotta come home, sir. Under our protection." Inside the cabin, Rena pressed a hand to her mouth. Andrew exhaled shakily. "I didn't want to drag trouble up this mountain." "You did what you had to," the man assured him. "But now you need to return. Sir, everything's fallen apart." The girls clung to Andrew's legs. She heard him kneel, murmuring something to them, too soft to catch. "And then?" "And the woman?" the mustached man asked. "She the one who tended you?" Rena felt her whole body tense. Andrew hesitated. "Yes, Rena saved our lives." "Then thank her kindly," the man replied, "and leave at first light. The sooner we get home, the better." Rena stepped back, heart cracking open like dry wood. So they would leave. Of course they would. A man like him, a wealthy Apache heir, a young master, born into land and legacy, did not belong in a widow's cabin on a lonely ridge. And she had been foolish enough to imagine otherwise. A chair creaked behind her. Before she could turn, Andrew stood in the doorway, his face heavy with guilt. "You heard," he said softly. Rena didn't trust her voice. She simply nodded. Andrew stepped closer, cane digging into the floorboards. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "I was afraid. Afraid you'd look at me different. Afraid you'd send me away." Her throat tightened. "You lied to me." "I hid who I was," he admitted. "But the feelings I have for you, those aren't a lie." She closed her eyes. "And now you're leaving." His breath trembled. "I have to. My people need me." "But Rena," his voice cracked, "when this is over, when it's safe, I'll come back for you. If you'll still want me." Rena looked at him then, truly looked. His eyes were full of fear of losing her, fear of failing his kin. She touched his cheek, her hand trembling. I don't know what the future holds, Andrew, but I know what I feel, and I know this hurts. He covered her hand with his. Then let me say this plain, he whispered. You saved my daughters. You saved me. And somewhere in those quiet days in your cabin, I fell in love with you. Her breath shivered. I'll return, he promised, as soon as the danger passes. Outside, his men waited. Inside, her heart broke in a way she hadn't expected it could again. By sundown, Andrew and his daughters were gone, leaving behind only footprints in the dirt and the ghost of a life that might have been. The cabin felt too quiet the next morning, so quiet it pressed against Rena's ribs like a heavy hand. She moved through her chores the way a ghost might walk its old house. Familiar paths, familiar motions, but no warmth behind them. Andrew's blanket was still draped neatly over the foot of her bed. Lily's wildflower crown lay on the table where she'd forgotten it. Rose's tiny shoes sat beside the hearth, dusted with dried mud from their last walk together. Rena touched each object gently, as if her fingers could hold the memories in place. But memories slip. They always do. When she stepped outside to fetch water from the creek, the prairie wind carried no children's laughter, no low murmur of Andrew's voice teasing her about her morning frown. Only the sound of the pines shifting overhead and the distant call of a hawk. Back to silence, she whispered. It should have been comforting. Instead, it hollowed her out. Rena gathered mushrooms, as she always had. She chopped wood, tended the goat, walked the same old trails she had walked before Andrew ever fell beneath that pine ridge. But everywhere she looked, she saw echoes of him. There by the creek was where he had sat, sharpening a branch into a cane, grinning sheepishly when she scolded him for working his leg too soon. On the porch, she still saw him leaning back with Lily asleep against his chest, Rose twirling a strand of her hair while telling him some half-made-up story. Inside, she heard him thanking her softly, each word rich and warm, like he meant every syllable. The girls' little voices haunted the house most of all. Mama Rena, Mama Rena. At night, she lay awake listening to the roof creak. The space beside her, once empty without consequence, now felt painfully bare. You fool, she murmured to herself more than once. You let yourself care. But the truth was harsher. She loved him. She had known it somewhere deep in her bones, the moment he told her he didn't care who she was or what she lacked. The moment he cupped her cheek with that gentle reverence that made her heart tremble. And now he was gone back to a world where she did not belong, a ranch of wealth and expectation, guarded by men who rode strong horses and carried rifles polished enough to show their own reflection, a world where she was nobody. The turning point didn't come suddenly. It arrived slowly, like dawn creeping across the valley. It began when Rena stood in the doorway one cold morning, holding the small dress she'd been sewing for Lily. She'd meant to give it to her before they left. Now it sat unfinished in her hands, mocking her hope. She folded it carefully, pressing the seams flat with her palm. Then she whispered, I can't wait here. The wind had shifted that morning, warmer, carrying the faint scent of distant sage. It felt like an invitation, or perhaps a challenge. By sundown, Rena had packed her few belongings. A spare dress, a handful of dried roots and herbs, the last of her savings wrapped in cloth, and the little wooden carving Andrew had whittled for Rose before leaving. She looked around her cabin one last time. The small table, the sturdy bed, the stone hearth, the shelves lined with jars of dried mint and pine needles. This place kept me alive, she said softly. But it ain't where my life is anymore. She saddled her muley, a stubborn creature named Huckleberry, and set out before daylight, following the long winding trail south toward Apache lands. The journey was harder than she expected. The land stretched wide and unforgiving, miles passing beneath the mule's hooves, each hour marked by dust and distant clouds. She slept under open skies, wrapped in her coat, listening to coyotes. She crossed dry creek beds, skirted steep ridges, and once hid behind a fallen tree when she spotted 3 men who rode like trouble. Her body ached, her fingers blistered. She learned again what it meant to survive on sheer stubbornness. But she carried one thing stronger than fear or fatigue: hope. Hope that Andrew was safe. Hope that the girls still remembered her voice. Hope that her heart hadn't gambled itself for nothing. On the 6th day, nearing a small settlement of mixed Apache and white families, Rena approached an elderly woman, selling woven baskets under a cottonwood tree. Her hair was silver, her eyes bright and patient. "You look worn thin, child," the woman said. "Traveling alone ain't easy these days." "I'm looking for the Heir ranch," Rena replied. "The big one south of here." The woman studied her carefully. "You going to see their young master?" Rena hesitated. "Yes." The old woman's mouth curled into something warm, almost knowing. "He ain't far. Follow the river trail west till you see the stand of tall pines. Big house behind him. Can't miss it." "Thank you," Rena whispered, emotion threatening to spill. "Go on then," the woman said. "Looks like you got something worth finishing." The Heir ranch was more beautiful than anything Rena had ever seen. A vast plain of green rolling out beneath the mountains, dotted with wildflowers that swayed like they were greeting her. A large log house sat proudly on a rise, sunlight striking its tall windows. Rena's breath trembled as she rode closer. Andrew stepped out onto the porch before she even called his name. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then he came down the steps faster than his healing leg ought to allow, and reached her just as she slid off the mule. "Rena," he said, voice breaking. "You came." She couldn't answer. Not before he pulled her into his arms, holding her as though he'd feared she'd disappear if he blinked. She felt his heartbeat against her cheek. "Straughty honest, calm. I thought I'd never see you again," he whispered. "I couldn't stay away," she breathed. "Not after everything." Lily and Rose burst out the door behind him, squealing, "Mama Rena," as they flung themselves around her waist. Rena laughed through tears. "Oh, my sweet girls, I missed you something fierce." But before the joy settled, 2 figures stepped onto the porch, Andrew's parents. Their expressions stiff, colder than mountain stone. Andrew tightened his hold on her, as though shielding her from winds stronger than any storm. Whatever came next, he would stand with her, and she would stand with him. Rena had never felt smaller than she did standing on the Heir porch, with Andrew's arms around her, and his parents staring down like judge and jury. The ranch house behind them was grand, too grand for a girl who'd spent 2 years patching holes in a single-room cabin. The thick log walls, the polished windows, the heavy beams overhead, they all whispered of wealth and lineage. Andrew's mother, Marilla Hale, was the first to speak. She was slender, but proud. Her black hair streaked with silver. Her dress sewn from the finest calico Rena had ever seen. Her eyes were sharp enough to cut truth from lies and hope from foolishness. "So," Marilla said slowly, "this is the woman who sheltered you." Rena swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I only did what anyone with a heartbeat ought to do." A humorless smile touched Marilla's lips. Few would risk angering bandits to save a stranger. Andrew stepped forward, keeping Rena close. "She risked everything," he said. "For me. For my daughters." His father, Jonas Hale, came down the steps then. A tall man with a stern jaw and the deep-set eyes of an Apache chief, though he no longer lived the old ways. He had the posture of someone accustomed to leading men, and not accustomed to being questioned. "Young master," Jonas said in a low, steady voice that carried more authority than a shout. We're relieved you're alive. But bringing this woman here—" His gaze cut to Rena briefly, not cruel, but assessing. "It complicates matters." Rena felt her throat tighten. Andrew stiffened beside her. "With respect, Father," Andrew said, "Rena deserves to be here." Jonas folded his arms. "Does she? Or are you chasing gratitude and calling it love?" Rena flinched. Andrew's jaw locked. "Love," Marilla repeated, raising a brow. "Andrew, surely you haven't let yourself—" "I have," he said firmly. "I'll love her. I won't deny it." The porch went still as graveyard soil. Marilla's voice softened, but not warmly. "My son, we have always hoped you would remarry someday. The girls need a mother. You need a partner. But you cannot bind yourself to someone who does not understand your world." Rena felt heat prickle her eyes. "I understand hardship," she said quietly. "I understand raising children, fearing for their lives, working the land to survive." "This is not about hardship," Marilla interrupted. "It is about heritage, legacy. You are a white woman alone on a mountain, with no clan ties, no ranching blood, no connection to Apache culture or Heir responsibility." Rena lowered her gaze. The words stung because they were true. Jonas stepped closer, voice grave. "And our son is the young master of this ranch. He will inherit all we built. A partner must stand beside him in that role." Rena felt her breath falter. "I didn't come here looking for riches," she whispered. Jonas softened only a fraction. "We know. But the ranch must survive long after we're gone. This family is not just blood, it is a duty." Andrew turned sharply toward his parents. "Duty doesn't mean a man can't choose his own heart." "You chose once," Marilla said quietly, "and we mourned that loss with you. But grief can confuse the mind. You're vulnerable, Andrew. You see comfort and call it destiny." "I see Rena," he said, "and that is enough." Marilla inhaled slowly, as though steadying herself. "Think of your daughters. Lily and Rose are Heir heirs. Their mother was one of our own people. What will the clan say if their new mother is an isolated widow with no standing?" Rena stiffened. Lily and Rose had been hiding behind the porch rail, listening with worried eyes. Rose's small voice broke the tension. "Mama Rena does have standing," she said. "She saved us." Lily nodded fiercely. "We love her." Marilla's lips pressed tight. Jonas exhaled through his nose. Andrew knelt and put a hand on each girl's shoulder. "No one has taken her from you," he said. "Not while I breathe." Rena felt her heart twist. She wasn't used to being defended, certainly not against people like this. Jonas spoke again, his tone measured. "Ah, think carefully. You bring this woman into the family, and the ranch may face backlash from both white settlers and Apache kin. They expect a certain order in things." Andrew stood tall. "Then they'll learn a new order." "Stubborn," Jonas muttered under his breath. "Just like your grandfather." Marilla's tone softened slightly, not with acceptance, but with maternal longing. "Andrew, we nearly lost you. Twice now. We only want what keeps you safe." Rena stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. "And what if loving him is what keeps him safe? What if he deserves someone who knows what fear feels like, who knows what it means to lose everything and keep going? I can stand with him. Maybe I ain't what you pictured, but I'm not afraid of hard living." Jonas studied her, long, silent, judging the measure of her spirit. But in the end, he shook his head. "This is not a matter of courage," he said. "It is a matter of belonging. You don't belong in this world, Miss Merrick." Andrew stepped between them. "Then I won't belong to this world either." Marilla's eyes widened. "Andrew." "I mean it," he said. "If you can't accept Rena, the girls and I will leave the ranch." Jonas's jaw tightened. "You'd abandon your inheritance?" I'd abandon anything, Andrew said, before I abandon her. Rena felt tears spill down her cheeks. She didn't want to be the cause of tearing a family apart, but she couldn't deny the fierce warmth blooming inside her at his words. Marilla closed her eyes, pained. Jonas turned away, shoulders heavy. This conversation is done for now, Jonas said, but think carefully before you throw away everything you were born to protect. That night, Andrew held Rena's hands in the quiet of a guest room. I meant what I said, he murmured. We'll leave if we must. I won't let them decide our future. Rena shook her head waffly. I don't want to take you from your family. You didn't take me, he whispered. You gave me back to myself. Outside, wind swept across the plains. Inside, a decision was being forged on that would change all their lives. Morning on the Heir ranch rose pale and gold over the plains. Rena had barely slept. She lay awake listening to the faint creak of the big house settling, the distant lowing of cattle, and the soft breaths of Lily and Ruth curled against her. She loved the girls more than she had expected, more than she dared admit aloud. And yet the weight of Andrew's parents' judgment pressed hard on her chest. Before dawn, she slipped quietly outside. The air was cool, rich with the scent of dew on sagebrush. She walked until the ranch house was just a shape behind her, then rested her hands on the fence and looked toward the distant horizon. She hadn't wanted a fancy life. She hadn't come looking for a home full of wealth and legacy. She had only followed her heart, something she hadn't done since her husband died. Something she never believed she would do again. Footsteps sounded softly behind her. Andrew. You're up early, he murmured, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. So are you. He touched her cheek gently, brushing away the trace of cold or a tear. He couldn't tell. I thought maybe you'd be gone, he admitted. I thought maybe the night would convince you it's easier to walk away. Rena shook her head. If walking away were easy, I'd have done it long ago. Andrew exhaled, a breath filled with relief and sorrow all at once. Then we've got a choice to make. She turned in his arms. It's your family, Andrew. Your land. Your legacy. I don't want to stand in the way of that. My legacy, he said softly, is Lily and Rose, and the life I build with them. With you. Her eyes stung, but she held his gaze. Your father won't approve. Your mother, she means well, but she'll never see me as part of this world. Andrew's jaw tightened with quiet resolve. Then we won't stay in this world. She stared at him. You'd leave the Heir ranch? I'd leave anything, he said, before I'd lose you. She shook her head, overwhelmed. They're your kin. They raised you. They love you. And I love them, he replied gently. But loving them doesn't mean living by their every rule. Sometimes a man has to make a new trail, Rena, even if the old one is well worn. He lifted her hands to his chest and held them there. I want a place where my daughters can run free, where you don't have to bow your head to anyone who thinks wealth makes a person's heart worth more. His voice softened. A place that's ours. Rena felt the truth settle inside her, like a warm fire. She nodded slowly, then with certainty. Then let's go, she whispered. Later that morning, Andrew walked into the main room with Rena beside him, and the girls skipping along at their heels. Jonas and Marilla Hale sat waiting, their face drawn in uneasy expectation. Andrew spoke before they could. I'm grateful for everything you taught me, he said, but I'm not staying on the ranch. Marilla's breath caught. Jonas rose slowly to his feet. Young master, Jonas said, his voice roughened with disbelief. This ranch was built for you. By your grandfather. By me, by your mother. I know, Andrew answered, and I honor that. But it's not the life I choose anymore. Marilla's eyes glistened. Is this because of her? No, he said firmly. It's because of me. Rena just helped me see what I truly wanted. Jonas paced a step away, then turned sharply. Son, if you walk away now, the clan may never accept you back. Andrew nodded. Then I'll build something new. Silence stretched long and thin. Finally, Jonas's shoulders sagged, not in anger, but in the heavy ache of letting go. Where will you go? He asked. Andrew took Rena's hand. Someplace quiet. A stretch of land I saw once out near the Sweetwater Plains. Good soil. Fresh water. No neighbors for miles. Marilla pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, but her voice steadied. If you must go, then take our blessing with you. Jonas closed his eyes briefly, then stepped forward and rested a hand on Andrew's shoulder. A man leads his own life. You do what you must, young master. It was the closest thing to approval Andrew had hoped for. 2 days later, Andrew hitched a sturdy wagon bought with a portion of his inheritance and loaded it with supplies. Flour, dried beans, tools, blankets, and a crate of seeds Marilla insisted Rena take for her future garden. Lily and Rose sat in the back of the wagon, playing with a rag doll Rena had sewn for them during quiet evenings on the ranch. Rena stood beside the mule, adjusting the reins. You ready? Andrew asked, his voice warm as summer wind. She smiled, her heart steady in her chest. I've been ready since the day I found you under that pine tree. He climbed onto the wagon seat and offered her his hand. She took it, settling beside him as the morning sun spread over the plains. The wheels creaked forward. The ranch grew smaller behind them, framed by rolling grass and blue sky. Ahead lay open land wild, waiting, untouched, a place to build a home of their own. Andrew glanced at her. Rena, whatever comes next, we face it together. She leaned into him, feeling his strength, his warmth, his promise. That's all I ever wanted, she whispered. And as the wagon carried them toward a horizon no map had ever claimed, Rena felt something she hadn't in years. A future, a family, a life chosen freely and lived bravely. Together. In the quiet stretch of Sweetwater Plains, Rena and Andrew built a life shaped not by fate, but by courage, loyalty, and the simple truth of choosing one another. Their days grew rich with laughter, their nights warm with belonging, and the wide western ski bore witness to a love that refused to be denied. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment so I can keep creating more tales for you. Thank you all for listening.